So you're new to the Warhammer hobby. Fantastic. You're in the right place. I've got a couple of things to show you along this sort of journey, and I'm also going to go through a list. So we're going to get your first model built and painted, and I'm going to part with you some wisdom that I think has been hard earned through my years of experience and trawling through the deepest recesses of Reddit to see what people mostly complain about when they get into this hobby. So hopefully this will all be helpful for you. If you stick around, maybe consider giving me a like and a subscribe, and let's get on with this video. These are hobby clippers, and they are a fantastic tool to definitely invest in. You can get different types along the way, but if you're just starting out, a pair of nail clippers works just the same as the clippers. So the clippers can go anything from £2.49 right up to about 30 to 40 quid. So for something that can come out of a Christmas cracker, a pair of nail clippers can be just as good for anybody starting this hobby. Now the next tool that I want to talk about, apart from myself, is my hobby blade, and I tend to use this scalpel. It is a size 10A. They are one of the most common sizes out there, and I find there's loads of replaceable heads that you can buy for them. Or you can use one of these retractable blades, which you can get in almost any hobby starter kit online or in any hobby store. Now remember, with knives, anything sharp, have a responsible adult or sponsor or person within arm's reach that knows how to use a telephone and phone for ambulance. If not, box of plasters. So the last things we're going to need is the literal glue to hold this all together. It's, well, glue. Huh, what does that say? My God, I'm sure we can ignore that. It'll be fine. I've made this joke before. So we want plastic cement glue, which is what this is. This is the Revel professional stuff. And then you got the plastic magic, which is a liquid glue that we use the brush applicator that comes with it to put on. And then a similar style is the Tamiya extra thin, and this does really well at getting down into all the little crevices when gluing items together. Personally, I would go for either the Revel or the Tamiya extra thin, but the Revel is the one that I use about 75% of the time. But these are the 3 items that we are going to need to progress on our first steps. So once you've chosen the models that you're going to be starting your hobby with, it is time to then start making them your own. And there's lots of different ways in which to do that. So this hobby is a journey, one that I hope to take you on today. And to show you how easy it is to make these models your own and to use the tools that we have just gone through, I'm going to be using a Space Marine Intercessor. This is probably going to be one of the more common items and sort of armies chosen. So if you've chosen Tyranids, Imperial Guard, Eldar, Tau, something like that, I do apologise, but this should all still hold up to how you go about building yours. These are all very interchangeable skills and ideas and planning that we are going to be going through. So as you may have just seen on the screen, I've used my knife just to trim this off of the sprue, and you could also use your hobby clippers to remove any leftover sprue or just to get them off the sprue in general. Usually easier to do it that way. Next, we want to use our knife just to sort of clean up that area where the model was attached to the sprue. Next, we're going to be using these upwards hand motions, dragging the knife, not using it in a way or for cutting, to get rid of this line that you can see going up the model. You want to be using a bit of a 45 degrees angle, and the reason why I say not to drag it is because you might end up cutting parts off that you don't want. Now, this line is where the model's been made, and you might find it around a lot of your Warhammer models. So this is just an easy way to be able to remove that line to prep it for painting later, so we don't have that in our way. So now that we've gone past the cleanup phase, which is getting everything off the sprue and removing those mold lines and sprue marks where they're attached to sprues, it's time to start assembling and putting this together. Now, using a lot of our techniques with the knife that we've just gone through to do with removing the mold line, I'm going to be removing certain details from this model because I don't like being told what to do and how to paint these. And these are
monoposed models with ultramarine insignia on them from the Indomitus Crusade. Well, what if I don't want them to be that? These are my models, I've paid my money for them, don't tell me what to do. It's just as simple as, again, remembering what I just said about those techniques, and just removing those marks. As you can see that I'm doing on this shoulder pauldron right now, I don't want it to be ultramarine, so say goodbye to that ultramarine insignia. I'm using just normal cutting techniques to trim it down and get it low to the same profile as the rest of the pauldron, and then I'll use that backward stroke technique to sort of blend it in to make it look like it was never there and remove any raised surfaces. So this next quick little tip is for anyone that is using the extra thin plastic cement glue. I wouldn't suggest using this technique if you have the Revel, because it needs that thin tension to be able to spread across, and also the brush applicator. And what this will do is it will just spread over that area where you've been trimming, chopping and cutting, and it will smoothen out and flatten the area for you instead of trying to get in with a nail file and things like that. It's an easy to use tool, and one that you probably have at your disposal. Now, when it comes to actually gluing your model together, just what you want to be looking out for is these very flat seams, and also where the holes are. That is the connection points that are going to match up perfectly with the second half of this model. That's where you want to put a light, thin layer of glue. I'm using my Tamiya brush just so it's more obvious as to where I'm placing this glue down to. If you put too much on, it will pretty much melt the model. So you want to be a little bit conservative with the amount of glue that you put on. I remember once with an Airfix model, I filled up the entire nose cone of a aircraft, and well, it drooped and melted. So don't put too much glue on when it comes to this stage, otherwise you might end up with a droopy nose cone of a Typhoon or a droopy Space Marine even.
And one of the main things to really remember is that this isn't paint by numbers, and I really want to make this hobby sort of more diverse in the way that our models look, because you've got to think with the ultramarines there's more than one way to paint them, same with Space Wolves or any other legion and faction. This isn't paint by numbers, although we can use the internet to look at the lore and the background of different armies and regiments and all that to sort of give ourselves an idea on where we can diversify how our models look.
Now, whilst talking about diversifying this hobby, this is called a bits box, and you can start yours today. That box that you have ready to build and ready to paint is going to have some leftover parts. Just remember to unclip all of those parts, don't throw them away, and put them into a container. Now this can be an old ice cream tub, an old Chinese takeaway box, anything that you have lying around that has a lid and that you can label bits box. Eventually, after a while, you will accumulate something very similar to this. Now this is not my only bits box. I have tubs, I have more of these sort of organized containers. I've got parts absolutely everywhere from such a grand scheme of different places. I can't even remember where they have all come from. I don't think that me converting this model right now is something that you have to do and that you feel like you desperately are going to need to have to do, but just to remember that this is something that you can start doing now after you finish that box that you have ready to go. And maybe, just maybe, in a couple of months to a year's time, you will be in the correct position to be able to convert your own models without having to go out and buy new kits just to do this. Although by then you'll probably be prepared to do the monetary, financially irresponsible thing and just go buy a new box in order to do some conversions. Not saying that's something that I've done before. Now, a little step that you can do before we go into the painting phase, and which helps make the model look a bit nicer at the end, is something called basing. Now, you don't have to do this from the get-go, but eventually you'll find yourself wanting to. But you can leave this bit clear, and you can come back to this once these models are painted and you're more confident within this hobby. So all I'm doing here is just slapping down some super glue. I'm then going to dip it into some sand of different grains, So there's small rocks and sand within this box, and then I'm just going to leave it to dry, and then we don't have to worry about it till the very end of our painting process, where we will make it look like the terrain or the ground that this Space Marine is standing on or based upon, hence calling it basing, getting the base looking nice and snazzy. Now, before your brush even touches the paint, I strongly suggest you do some research online. Everybody has the internet. We all have access to it. There is no excuse to paint up your first model and go, I don't like the color scheme. Linked down below will be this website that I'm using right now, the Bolter and Chainsword Space Marine Painter. You can print this off, color it in with some pencils and pens, or you can use the application online, which even tells you what color you will need to buy from the Citadel paint range. I'm not saying go buy the Citadel paint range. I'm just saying this is an amazing tool, and it's not one that should be overlooked. And I see a lot of other YouTubers overlook suggesting this to new players. Yes, maybe because making a homebrew chapter, which is what I am doing and how I am using this, is not really a beginner thing. But again, also, these are your models. You want them to look as cool as possible. Now, I'm not going to fully teach you about homebrew, but as long as you sort of go, hey, I really like Blood Angels. Blood Angels are amazing, but I want to paint them completely different to how everyone else paints them. Well, you'll need to sort of make sure that you are happy with how it looks, and this tool is fantastic for doing that. Also out there in the great wide world, there is the Warhammer lexicon, there is the Warhammer wiki, and there is Reddit. There is so many different places where we can go to hunt down how we want to paint our models and what legion we want, or if we're painting Eldar, how do I want my Eldar to look? Or Tau, how do I want my Tau? What Tau sept am I going to paint? You know, what part of the Tyranids am I going to paint? Am I going to go with High Feet Leviathan, or do I want Behemoth or Behemoth, or however you want to pronounce that word? This is all up to you, and I really do suggest that you have a look beforehand instead of painting up half an army then realizing, oh, I don't like the Space Marines, or I don't like the Ultramarines, I wish I'd gone for Orcs, they look like they're having a jolly good time, or I don't like how this red matches with that yellow. This is why I think just having that little extra step, that little extra hour, just perusing and looking and understanding, hey, I don't have to paint my models like everybody else. I can do my own thing. And it is encouraged. Don't just be the poster boy Ultramarines. Don't just be the standard Blood Angels. Don't just be the normal Dark Angels. Be your own characters. Be yourself. And just remember, at the same time, you can be the standard poster boys. I mean, they're there for a reason. They are a really good blueprint in which to springboard off your army to. So, yeah, you might sort of think, hey, I like yellow. Yellow's a cool colour. Imperial Fists. But then you might sort of be like, well, I like the Imperial Fists, but I don't like yellow. Well, then you've got Crimson Fists or even Black Templars. So there's so much nuance to this that this is why I'm saying it's worth just doing a bit of research into what you want to have and how you want to paint your guys. And who knows, hopefully this will really help you throughout your hobby, or to at least start your hobby, because I know when I first started, I started with the Cadian Shock Troopers, and I loved Starship Troopers, and I wanted to paint my guys like that, but I ended up just painting them like the box art, and I always sort of kind of regretted doing that, even to this day. Anyway, this page that we've been using to sort of like to figure out how I'm going to be painting my dude, my own little homebrew concoction, Space Marine, customization, conversion, all the words, all the big buzzwords that you hear. It's just a dude that I've painted differently and built away from the instructions. I've used hammer and bolter bolter and chainsaws page, so I'm going to give them a little kickback because I feel like a lot of creators overlook this very vital tool and they don't really give it the shout out, even though it's used so much and I see it absolutely everywhere. So I'm going to chuck in $5. I'm not exactly flush with cash at the moment, so that's what they can have. Hopefully it gets them a coffee or a sandwich, or can go towards a cool model for the guys that spent a lot of time and effort creating this tool that is used so widely. So now that we know what a model's going to look like, and I'm sure they're all going to look absolutely awesome, we need to then get painting. So to start with, I like to put my models on a painting handle, which is a shot glass with a bit of blue tack on it, and then you press it on, and that means that I have a bit more control over the painting of my model and how I'm holding it, so I can manipulate it better in my hand. And also it means I'm not smudging my fingers all over fresh paint. So I know as long as I'm holding the handle, I'm not going to be smearing and ruining any of my paint jobs. So once that's all done, it is time for the most important paint layer that there is. And you can see me putting black paint all over this model. And this is Vallejo's black airbrush primer. I'm using a brush. I'm not going to use my airbrush because, well, you probably don't have an airbrush and it would seem a bit silly for me to teach you using a tool that you don't have. So I'm going to brush this on and we're gonna sort of just have a quick talk about primers quickly. So the reason why I'm putting this on is because it gives the paint something to adhere to, something to grab onto instead of going straight onto plastic. Primers are designed to sort of go on and hold a bit tighter when they're on the plastic and on the model, so they won't rub off as easily. Also, if you just go straight onto bare plastic, you will eventually lose your paint. It will either flake off or chip off or just come off over time, and all your hard effort will be ruined. So I strongly suggest getting yourself some primers, maybe even just going to a car shop or like Halfords or AutoZone or wherever, and getting some car primer, because that will go on really well. And it comes in a spray can, which you can just spray all over the models, and it definitely speeds up this process instead of doing what I'm doing now, which is spending forever trying to get 2 coats on to make sure that it's a nice solid colour. And as I said, I only really use my airbrush, which means I'm not that tooled up for this bit that I'm doing here, which is priming and then getting kind of like a zenithal highlight on it, which what that means is a top light aspect using a brighter colour. So I've got some terrain spray paint which goes on quite thickly, and I'm telling you that detail for what happens next. So I've made a mistake and I've used the wrong tools, basically. My primer has gone on really thick, and then this terrain primer that I've put on over the top has gone on real thick. And I'm going to try and salvage what I can using isopropyl alcohol. This isn't something that I need you to learn from, or something that I need you to learn right now. It's good to have it in your head for later, but what I want you to know is that making mistakes is not the end of the world, and actually to admit that we've made one is perfect. So I'm going to try and rectify my mistake now, because I know what I've done wrong, so I know what I need to rectify to correct this mistake. Which is I've got an airbrush primer. I'm trying to be clever. I just need to airbrush it on. So that's that's the base of it, really, isn't it? So I'm gonna try and remove some of this thickness using isopropyl alcohol. If that doesn't work, well, we'll see. But this section here is about mistakes, so let's try and have a look at what happens next.
Another thing about this hobby is making mistakes is absolutely fine. You are allowed to mess up and start again. Don't try and hold yourself to some sort of different level or standard that you may not be at yet. You may be unhappy with something, as I was with this miniature. I wasn't happy with how the paint had settled. So I tried removing it, it didn't quite go the way to plan, so I've just started over and gone back to the beginning of where I originally was to make sure that I'm happy with my finished result, because it's not a bad thing to start from the beginning.
So now that I have rectified my mistake, and I've done that by just building an entirely new model and converting that, and then using my airbrush to get my primer on. Those are the tools I have. That's what I should have gone with in the first place. Anyway, that's not the step we're on now. Now it's time to put your brush in the paint and start getting it onto your model. Now, the formula that I use for painting the mass parts of these models, so I will see what is the bulk color, and for this one it is brown. So for that, I'm going to be doing what I like to call layer dry brush. So I'm using a darker color as seen on this chart here. These aren't the colors I'm using, by the way. I'm just using this as an example. So I use a darker color to block in and paint the entirety of the model that should be within this color. I then move to a slightly lighter color and I use what is called the dry brushing technique. Now for this, you want to get sort of a flat-headed brush. Makeup brushes actually are really good for this, but if not, you can buy specific dry brushing brushes. I mean, it's that simple, isn't it? Now, it's quite counterintuitive because you don't want to get rid of all the moisture off of your brush. For this, you actually want to have a bit of moisture retained so that the paint can part from the brush and go onto the model and adhere to it. And for achieving this, you would have seen me using that bit of MDF in the background. Now, you can use a bit of MDF or even a bit of cardboard down to the box that it arrived in. Just don't use the glossy side, as you're really going to struggle to get the paint off if you're using the glossy side. So you want to sort of do it on something that's a little bit exorbitant to really get that paint off. Now we're just going to be using a downwards brush stroke all over the model to sort of give it that encapsulating look, that the light is coming down, and to give it that new paint value, and to sort of show that it's not just stuck in a 2D world, we're bringing it back into the 3D world, because what this would do is catch all the raised edges and leave all the recessed areas and parts underneath where the light's not getting to in the old color, and have that new highlighted color on top. And again, going around and looking at my guide for how I want to paint this, this is pretty much how I'm going to paint all of those large blocky areas. So the red arm, the white shoulder pauldrons, and even the metal parts. You can see me sort of starting to pick parts out as we go, and I'm sort of going back in and doing it to all these different layers so I can touch up with the paints that are available. If I make mistakes, I can then just go straight back with the same color and paint over it to hide any of those mistakes under a thin layer of paint. So now that I've gone around using those two techniques to pick out all the details on this model, I'm going to show you how to do the base in a really fast and simple technique and way, which is doing a white highlight over our black paint, which is also known as a zenithal highlight. You may hear that throughout the hobby. That's all it is. It's doing a bright color over a dark base that isn't going to be the final product. What we are doing is undershading before we then add contrast paint, speed paint, or just general washes that you can get throughout the hobby and mostly come with the Citadel range. So with that, these are more translucent paints, and I like to use just washed, watered down normal acrylic paint, which is what I'm using here. I'll get that on, and once it's on and still wet, I will add a different color. So whether it's a darker or lighter color, who knows, but that's just to give it a nice bit of variety while it's sort of there and it's able to mix and blend really well with the two colors. Once I've done that, I leave it to dry for a nice long time, because this isn't going to dry quickly. It will take a couple of hours, but this is normally the last steps. That shouldn't really matter too much. Once that's done, just grab one of your highlight colors or a nice brighter color from what is down there and just give it a quick dry brush over the top to really sort of finish off how it looks. And if you have any grass tufts, or which may be something that you have, maybe something that you don't have yet, you can add a couple of those just to really finish it off and make it look like it's in an environment. But this can be done later. If you haven't got them now, that's fine. When you do buy them, you just go back and add some more to your models. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. It's you that decides when your model is finished. Most people say the model's finished when you do the black rim, and that's to neaten it up and really finalize your model to say, hey, I am finished with this model. But it doesn't have to be the case. Once they're painted and once they're ready, you can go back later and improve on your paint jobs. Nothing is going to stop you from doing that, and nobody should stop you from doing that. So with that, you should now have an awesome model painted up with these very simple techniques. You've gone from having a box which is not even open yet to your first model painted. Hopefully this answers a lot of questions about things like, oh, can I paint my Ultramarines with purple shoulder arm? Yeah. Why not? You know, like, if you like the look of it, you go for it. These are your models, and hopefully these simple painting techniques will help you get your first models painted. Now, there are a lot better painters out there than me. I am not the best painter in the world, so take what I say with a little bit of a pinch of salt, as you should for everyone else. And now onto the final part, my biggest thing to say to anyone new coming to this hobby. It's just a game. And that is it, really. As anticlimactic as that may seem, or may even feel, that's what this is. It's something special that me and you share. We have got into this for our own reasons, and we will tell our friends who don't care about our new model, our new thing. You know, we will tell our family. We share on Instagram, we share on YouTube, we watch videos about it, we make videos about it. That's part of this hobby for me, which is why it's more than just a game. I love making dioramas. You know, these little special snapshots of our universe that don't exist. I like to create them in my head and put them onto plimps, and I like showing you how I do that. I don't really play the tabletop. I don't really have anyone to play the tabletop with, but I love the world that we are immersing ourselves in. So welcome to this hobby, and remember to share it with anyone that will listen, even if that's by force.